Hi there and welcome to the channel, and this is the sixth of my recommendation videos, my periodic attempts to interest you the viewer in works of literature I particularly enjoyed. Now the preparation for this video was very simple. I read all of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories, 68 of them, amounting to 955 pages, and I read them in this Everyman hardback edition, the only drawback of which is sadly it doesn't feature any illustrations. Now, with regard to the recommendations themselves, of which there are 5, I haven't chosen any of Poe's most famous tales, the kind you will find in these collections: Spirits of the Dead, Tales and Poems, this is a Penguin Classics, and another Penguin Classics, The Murders in the Rue Morgue and Other Tales. So, No, the Pit and the Pendulum, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, The Purloined Letter, and so on. Instead, I've focused on the gems among Poe's less well-known works. So even if you've read quite a lot of Poe, the hope is you may still find some tales here that you are not familiar with. All of the links are in the description, and they will take you to the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore, the premier resource for Poe's works online. And all that remains now before we get started is for me to introduce my special guest. The eagle-eyed among you may already have noticed I am accompanied by these beautiful lilies, purchased yesterday by my wife. They are in fact the second botanical guest to grace the channel, as I featured my avocado tree on numerous occasions last year. Alright, we're ready to begin. The first story I've selected is The Mystery of Marie Roget, one of 3 of Poe's tales that feature the detective Dupin, the other 2 being The Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Purloined Letter. This story is significantly longer than either of those and is, in my view, of comparable quality. It also has an interesting backstory. It's based on the case of the murder of Mary Rogers in New York City, which dominated the newspaper reporting at the time. And what Poe does is transpose the events to Paris while retaining all of the essential facts, which he gleaned only from the newspaper coverage. And he then makes a series of quite brilliant deductions, which were years later borne out when 2 of those involved in the crime came forward and confessed. This story is highly recommended. Just a note on Dupin: the inspiration for this figure was Eugene-Francois Vidocq, recognized as the first private detective in France, who was both a thief and a detective, and as a master of disguise went on to influence a number of other fictional creations, among them Raffles, Maurice Leblanc's excellent Arsène Lupin stories, and of course the most famous fictional detective of all, Sherlock Holmes. Okay, next. The second story I've selected is King Pest. It's set in London during the time of the Black Death, during the reign of Edward III, and it's very short, only 12 pages or so. It's more of a sketch actually, but what it does is showcase Poe's grotesque imagination. It reminds me very much of one of those Tim Burton animated movies, and I'll just read you a brief extract to give you an idea of the atmosphere. Before each of the party lay a portion of a skull, which was used as a drinking cup. Overhead was suspended a human skeleton by means of a rope tied round one of the legs and fastened to a ring in the ceiling. The other limb, confined by no such fetter, stuck off from the body at right angles, causing the whole loose and rattling frame to dangle and twirl about at the caprice of every occasional puff of wind which found its way into the apartment. In the cranium of this hideous thing lay a quantity of ignited charcoal, which threw a fitful but vivid light over the entire scene, while coffins and other wares appertaining to the shop of an undertaker were piled high up around the room and against the windows, preventing any ray from escaping into the street. I love the combination of invention and precision one finds in Poe's work, and the third story I've chosen is exemplary in this respect. It's one of 3 of Poe's short stories that are first-person accounts of imaginary journeys through the air, and the first of these is the balloon hoax of 1844. This was a hoax perpetrated by Poe when he planted in the newspaper a supposedly true first-person account of a transatlantic balloon crossing, which had only taken 75 hours. Many readers were taken in, as were the editors, and 2 days later, when the hoax was revealed, the story was retracted. The other 2 stories are Melantonta Tauta, which is now a rather dated piece of satire, and concerns a journey by airship, and my favourite, the unparalleled adventure of Hans Pfaall. And what this story has is an incredible tension between the scientific nature of the narration and the increasingly preposterous contents of that narrative, and it goes on for almost 50 pages. It's a wonderfully sustained piece of imaginative writing, and for that reason, I highly recommend it. Okay, next. The fourth story I've chosen is one of the two short stories Poe set at sea, the first of which, MS Found in a Bottle, is perhaps better known, and which prompted Joseph Conrad, no less, to write to Poe expressing his disbelief that a landlubber could show such understanding of what it means to be on the water. The secret, I believe, is Poe's understanding of the vast physical forces at work in the natural world. In the story I'm going to talk about, A Descent into the Maelstrom, you do feel you are in the grip of a storm, then you're being pitched overboard and finally whirled around inside a vortex. It's the most sublime of Poe's short stories, and it has a wonderful setting, so I'll just read you the opening of it. We had now reached the summit of the loftiest crag. For some minutes the old man seemed too much exhausted to speak. "Not long ago," said he at length, "and I could have guided you on this route as well as the youngest of my sons. But, about 3 years past, there happened to me an event such as never happened before to mortal man, or at least such as no man ever survived to tell of, and the 6 hours of deadly terror which I then endured have broken me up body and soul. You suppose me a very old man, but I am not. It took less than a single day to change these hairs from a jetty black to white, to weaken my limbs and to unstring my nerves, so that I tremble at the least exertion and am frightened at a shadow. Do you know I can scarcely look over this little cliff without getting giddy?" The little cliff upon whose edge he had so carelessly thrown himself down to rest that the weightier portion of his body hung over it, while he was only kept from falling by the tenure of his elbow on its extreme and slippery edge, this little cliff arose, a sheer, unobstructed precipice of black shining rock, some 15 or 1600 feet from the world of crags beneath us. Nothing would have tempted me to be within half a dozen yards of its brink. In truth, so deeply was I excited by the perilous position of my companion that I fell at full length upon the ground, clung to the shrubs around me, and dared not even glance upward at the sky, while I struggled in vain to divest myself of the idea that the very foundations of the mountain were in danger from the fury of the winds. It was long before I could reason myself into sufficient courage to sit up and look out into the distance. "You must get over these fancies," said the guide, "for I have brought you here that you might have the best possible view of the scene of that event I mentioned, and to tell you the whole story with the spot just under your eye." What magnificent writing, I hope you agree. My final recommendation is The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, a very short story, and it picks up on one of the themes that Poe returns to again and again, that of live burial. Most famously, of course, in The Fall of the House of Usher, but also in The Premature Burial, Ligeia, and Loss of Breath. And in The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, a man is placed in a hypnotic trance as he is dying. It's by consent, I must note, and then this allows the hypnotist to speak to him, firstly as he dies, and then from the other side of life. And what is also notable about this tale is its absolutely terrifying, ghastly ending. So I just drop it in as my final recommendation for its shock value. Okay, I believe I'm done. It's time to say goodbye in the customary fashion. So from me and my lilies, until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.